On this episode of the Layover Live, Andreas Weissenborn and Shimo Shimasaki stop by to talk about Mint. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of the Layover Live. I'm Jason Swick, VP of Strategy and Insights, and welcome to this, again, special edition of the show. Why is it special edition? Well, normally we're talking about leisure and digital marketing, but today we're going to talk a little bit more about meetings. Now, it's no secret that meetings, conferences, and events are a key driver of tourism to many destinations around the globe, accounting for hundreds of billions of dollars in direct, indirect, and induced spending every single year. It also goes without saying that the sector of tourism was hit very hard by the pandemic, arguably the hardest of all the sectors. But according to our Insights Hub, and I'd encourage you to check it out, meetings traffic has been steadily rebounding for some time across DMO websites. Now, as meetings and events sales rebound, there are tools that can be extremely useful to DMOs to help them do more with less. Now, Destinations International has been a shepherd to Mint, a meetings business development tool, which we're going to talk about today, for over 100 years. Yes, you heard me right, over 100 years, which is pretty much how much I feel like I've aged inside over the last 2 years during the pandemic. But regardless, Mint has been recently transformed to ease reporting, providing much more meaningful data and market segmentation. And there's so much value in bringing the right meetings and events at the right time to destinations. And with Mint, you can do just that. So today, two of the industry's very best when it comes to talking about meetings and events and group business, more particularly Mint, which we're going to get into today, are here to join us. And so first, I want to welcome Andreas Weissenborn, who is the Vice President of Research and Advocacy at Destinations International. So Andreas, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Jason. Also, thank you as well to our other guest, Shimo.
Yes, and Shimo, welcome to the show. Do we really need to introduce you, Shimo?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
well, okay. So I feel like everybody knows you, but Shimasaki, better known as Shimo, is the managing director for 2Synergize. So happy to have you here, one of my favorite people in the industry. So welcome as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Great to join you, Andres.
All right, guys. So let's get into it. I've got Shimo here, fellow marketer on the other side of the house, right? And golfer, which is important to know too. I want to make sure of that. And I've also got Andres here too, which has a podcast as well as many other hats that he wears at DI. I get him on the other side of the camera now, which is pretty cool. So, but I want to start with you, Shimo, and start to hop into this. Before we start to discuss Mint a little bit, I want to talk about the perspective around meetings a little bit, because oftentimes we experience destinations through group meetings or conferences or things of that nature. So I want to get your perspective on this because I think it's important. So how do meetings and events impact leisure travel and really the vitality of a destination?
Well, there's no question that many, and like we've all discussed, we experience destinations maybe for the first time when we ourselves go to a meeting or to a convention. So we know by several studies that meetings are definitely an economic driver to a destination, but they're a driver in a lot of other ways, not just from an exposure standpoint for leisure visitation, but also for business relocation. And so, meetings fundamentally, I think, really provide a great foundation. And we could see how the vitality of a lot of destinations has improved just by the virtue of having a convention center in their downtown and really spurring other economic development.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, we just experienced that very recently at our own retreat, taking over the hotels downtown and how much that brings business to that area. It's so important to the vitality of a destination. And one of the tools that really helps, I think, bring all that together and really help is Mint. And so for those not familiar with it, it is a joint venture now with SimpleView and Destinations International. It's one of our proud partnerships. It's something that we've worked on very hard. I know Shimo, you've been working on this for a very, very long time. But Andreas, I want to ask you on this side, maybe to provide a little bit of history about the partnership, and maybe also just for a little more insight into what it is for those who may be not familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the comment about, the sharing of the tool or something 100 years. I mean, it's
Mhm.
point to point out that the sharing of consumed business events is something very unique of a value for us on our sector, the destination organization. So that
Right.
behavior of, from, faxes to pigeons to, the latter part of the past 20 years of sharing of consumed events is kind of part of our core of destinations, which is very unique. But probably as most listeners for the last 20 years are experiencing Mint, as I have in my perspective of it, is through the Mint database, where destinations after an event was consumed would submit this data to a database, some basic event-based information on geographic rotation, attendance, the stuff that's vital to a salesperson for looking at new business. And then the flip side of it was then sales individuals looking at it for prospective new business. I was kind of talking a little earlier about the show. My relationship with the tool is very uniquely linked with the other guests with Shimo here, because my history before Destination International was working at a bureau. I used to work for Visit Baltimore, then known back in the day as the Baltimore Area Convention and Visitors Association. And I got to see the tool from both components of it, which was, I would have to help educate our service staff members on the fields and stuff needed to upload into the tool, which was, again, funny because we used to, get these compliance emails from Shimo's domain name saying you got to submit, you're compliant. And then the flip side of it was then also trying to help our sales staff with, sales deployments and whatnot, to look at Mint as a database tool for, okay, what events should we be looking to procure for our destination? Which events actually best fit for our destination, and at the time, Baltimore heavy medical society with Hopkins, University of Maryland, so on and so forth. Like look, as an example, like, okay, what kind of events fit that type of strategy? And that's kind of, I would imagine most specializations have been using Mint, especially the last, 20 to 30 years, is actually both the consumption level, but also providing some insight to how do we want to go forward with looking at events that best fit our destination.
Yeah, it's been absolutely a staple, of the industry for such a long time. And now this partnership allows us, from a technological standpoint, to expand things even further and make sure that we're ready for the future and what's ahead, because it is such an important part of our business. So let's get into that. Maybe let's continue on that side then, Andreas, and talk about some of the new features that are coming to Mint that may be beneficial for some DMOs out there.
Yeah, and it's worth to, again, talk a little bit the history about how Mint used to operate, to emphasize how important these changes are with both the relationship with SimpleView and the new technologies going behind it. The process I just defined earlier, the first one, right? I had to go walk down the hallway when we were in offices to my service department and make sure that, okay, we just consumed these 3 citywides. One, are they in the CRM? And 2, did we push the button, from our CRM into Mint? And so that was the first major technological advancement I want to talk about now, is the concept now of the all-in methodology. As I mentioned, I said I used to get these emails from my organization from Shimo that said you are non-compliance, like you didn't submit your monthly data. That's gone now. And I can't emphasize how big of a quality of life improvement that is for the platform, because, like even before the pandemic, like we're all being stretched in a million different directions. And sometimes something's even as simple as just remember to push the button to upload into Mint gets missed, especially for our services staff. I want to just emphasize, how much more they've had to do now through the pandemic. This is just such a massive quality of life improvement that now we have this all-in methodology that, all the CRMs are synced synonymously to the Mint. So as soon as the event is consumed and so on and so forth, it's automatically uploaded to Mint. That's a huge quality of life improvement. The second really is, and the one that I guess I miss not being at the DMO side for the CV side, is now all the expanded reporting capabilities of the tool. I mentioned earlier, part of my other gig was helping the sales staff look at deployments and using, and again, a query tool that was in there, all by basic, but, work for what it was. And just realizing how far that's come now is really the advancements in the query tools to actually, get to the data we need to get to faster, more accurately, so forth. The other core technology improvement with being able to query better means that the data also has had to become better. And that was really one of the other exciting advancements now with the tool, is now the advanced and comprehensive market segmentation. that now we've aligned with standard market segments across both nonprofits and for-profit organizations with how they get uploaded into Mint. Again, back when our organizations had to submit data, you were reliant on sort of the insight and knowledge of the staff to best submit where these market segments go. And, that kind of become the wild, wild west. Mm-hmm. And that only got more pronounced when you try to pull data out. Maybe someone saw this market segment as this, and then you might think it's something like this. And that's gone. Like that actually, standardization of segmentation is now standardized. And that's huge. It's going to help so much with just getting better data out. And the final one, I think the biggest emphasis is now, with the advancements of the all-in and now the standardization of the market segments, is really this recommendation engine of what meetings actually best fit your organization. As I mentioned, that was part of my manual gig was, okay, we can fit X amount of square footage type events here that work with this geographic rotation and this market segment. And, it kept me employed, I'm not going to lie, which is great. But now that the tool now has the intelligence to actually provide a level of recommendation, the same way, right? We handle Netflix, Amazon, you guys do online dating, all that kind of stuff. You're actually using the tool to help be a step in front of you with your sales staff, that you don't necessarily have to manually do that process, that they can give you some insight as part of it. And I think those things are just, again, massive quality of life, quality of product improvements for, current subscribers and new subscribers that really, I guess the end of the day is that, the tool is now working better for you than it ever has before. So you can do what you're meant to do, which is sell and market your destination for meetings and events, more or less.
Yeah, great information. I think you talk about the tools making our lives easier. That's what they should do, right? And the challenge, listen, we understand the challenges with data, right? The market segmentation, it becomes a massive challenge when you're trying to pull that out and be able to utilize that in different ways. That having that universal market segmentation, to your point, is it's like a game changer in many ways, right? Because we get away from spending all of our time doing these little tasks, which you had mentioned when you were at the CBB in Baltimore, that, hey, that's great, but I spent a lot of time with to-dos, which means I spent less time on working the business and getting the people to come to my destination, right? Which is what we should be spending most of our time on, is working the right lead, and then allowing us to work the right leads to come to our destination, which, again, this tool does tremendously. So Shimo, I want to go to you now too and talk about, your insights or comments on some of the things that have already been shared, and also on, when some of these new features might be available, because I know you're very instrumental in steering this.
Well, thank you, Jason, and great job, Andreas, in talking about the new benefits. But the features are all available now. So we're real proud that we released the recommended meetings at the end of 2021. Mm-hmm. But Jason, I wanted to jump off on one of the things that might be relevant for the marketers who might be listening in, is that this whole market segmentation is important, because if you think about your email campaigns that salespeople need, we can now be a little bit more targeted. So if you're speaking to a medical market segment, like if you're in Baltimore, as in Andreas's historical case, your email campaigns could be talking about some of the assets in the destination. So I think it's really relevant as we think forward as to how we're going to start communicating into the future to, certain segments that a destination might be pretty strong in. But we're really looking forward to some of the feedback. We're just pushed live in the system, this whole feedback mechanism, so that when users are in a record and they see something that might need some enhancements, we have a full-time data team now that is associated with Mint, that is able to go and immediately research those records and make sure that the right information is in there. So the whole concept that Andreas spoke about earlier is that this data co-op, meaning this whole cooperation by the industry, by 130 DMOs today, is really incredible, and I think will be one of the foundational success factors as we move forward. Nowhere else in the industry are we sharing data at this level for the mutual benefit of other destinations. And it's something that I think Destinations International and certainly we at SimpleView, but the industry in general should be very proud of.
Yeah, I agree with you. Very well said. I think it's very, very important, right? It benefits all of us in that saying. And again, it just allows us to be more effective in our job so that we can evangelize our value, right? That's really, really important. You touched on something too around the market segmentation, about the being able to provide more of a personalized experience for these folks, which I think is so important. Marrying this, you talked about email marketing and marketing automation to help make your life a little easier that way and provide the people with the right information at the right time. Is so important, and one of the key benefits. It's creating a better overall user experience, which translates technically into usually more business into your destination. So that's great, guys. So in wrapping up, I always like to ask the guest what the future holds, and I'm going to kind of ask this to both of you. So Shimo, I'll stay with you first on this one. What do you see, in the future of meetings and events industry? What insights maybe you can share with the audience that you found most interesting?
Well, I think if we think about the near term, the meetings and events, we're fully expecting a full recovery by 2024. But I think that even in the interim years leading up to 2024, we're going to see some significant recovery. This year, we're expecting in 2022, for example, between 60 and 70% of 2019 numbers, which was heralded as, a really successful year. So it's a benchmark year that we're comparing our performance back to. But when we look at even just a year from now, going into 2023, those numbers really jump to 80 to 90%. So we're really looking at a pretty optimistic recovery over this next couple of years in the meetings and convention segment. But I think that, your chart that you showed earlier, Jason, where you're showing the uptick, the continued growth of the web pages for the meeting segment, we're seeing that same sort of uptick in terms of the volume of new leads coming through the CRM systems. So when we take a look at that data, leads being something that we're carefully watching, over the last couple of weeks, we've kind of seen a really consistent uptick and even into the 90% of leads that were generated in 2019 at the same point of time. So we're very optimistic about where we're headed. But I think in that optimism, one of the most important things we could all do is to make sure that we take advantage of the sales and marketing relationship, right? So we've always sort of had a divide between sales and marketing teams, but I think that now is the time that we really need to get closer and closer together on what those strategies should be to make sure that the sales funnels are full and we're utilizing sales talent for the most important task, which is relationship building and really helping fill need time periods for a destination. So I think that the future is bright, and certainly there's no better way than to keep going up.
Yes, love that. Great insights there, and could not agree with you more. That's great to see. And Andreas, over to you. Same question. What are you seeing in the future of meetings in the events industry?
Yeah, I'll probably drop more of the research hat and do the advocacy hat here and just kind of point out, to remind everyone. So for most of our community, especially domestically, even before the pandemic, a lot of our cities have been struggling financially, flat out, sometimes have been broke, from crumbling infrastructure, expanded energy usage, housing crisis, so on and so forth. And it's important to remember that for a community to raise revenue, there's really only two means: either tax your residents more, try to expand the tax base, or the visitor economy. And the thing is that in terms of where we are now, in terms of our placement in the world and economic recovery, there is only one significant generator of economic recovery, and that is, destination promotion, and importantly, the act of producing meetings and events. I think now more than ever, communities that are suffering financially are going to look at this and say, okay, well, we cannot tax our residents more. What can we do to invest to bring net new money to our community? And there is no better answer than meetings and events. So, I think people are going to start looking now more, hopefully, towards entities like desk organizations and convention visitors bureaus, saying, okay, how can we provide investment to you to help our area grow? A lot of us already know that when a large convention or, business meeting comes into effect, that there is an act of compression, meaning, these events produce a ripple effect beyond just the community, but the surrounding community. So they kind of punch above their weight class, not just for the city, but the state and the region. And I think there's going to be greater and hopefully emphasis now on why these are so important, that it's beyond just looking at it as heads and beds, but actually more in the discussions of how meetings and events take a role in economic development. So again, it's a little bit of hopeful hat for me. And I think for you as a destination organization professional, the ability to quantify that and showcase, hey, these are the events we can bring to our community, what they mean, it's going to be vital. It's going to be part of the next normal of operating a bureau. So I think it's kind of my big prediction is they're going to hopefully, I think this would have happened without the pandemic, but the pandemic has greatly accelerated that. And that's something I'm very excited for because it actually showcases my core belief, which is what we do is a common good for the greater good for our communities.
Yeah, very, very, very well said. Great perspective from two of some of the best in our industry. So Shimo, Andreas, thanks for stopping by. Really appreciate sharing your insights, not only around the industry, but this great tool in Mint and why. And if you're looking for more resource around that, check out Destinations International has a ton of content on this. Simple View as well. We have a lot of content around this, and Shimo and the team would love to talk to you about that as well. So guys, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thanks for tuning in each and every week. If you're not subscribed, please do so now. We're also available on Spotify and iTunes through audio podcast. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time and have a great day.